To the Roundhouse today. Just tell you a little bit what this project is. We're basically trying to get, memories, reminiscences, from people who have lived here within the East Wilson community, and kind of looking back on, what's happened here in the past, maybe 40, 50, 60 years. Always depending on how old the person is, how much they know. Just trying to collect those memories so they don't go away. Because, a lot of people around here just don't know what this community used to be like. So that's our ultimate goal with this.
Sure.
To get started, if you could please tell us what your name is and what your connection is here to this community here in Wilson.
My name is Maurice, and I'm a native of Wilson. And I have come back and forth over 50 plus years that of living. And I would have to say at the very outset, I'm extremely proud and grateful to call Wilson home. And wherever I go, I don't mind telling folks I'm from Wilson because the community in which I was raised shaped me, and the people that touched my life was, left an indelible mark. And it is because of them that I am where I am, as we say, by the grace of God. And so I value as I've moved around and had various experiences, if you will, across the world. Wilson is the place that I learned those values. So I grew up. I went to kindergarten at St. Alphonsus Catholic Church, a Catholic school, and that was by far a life-changing experience, to say the least. And as most of the kids, those of us who are adults now, would talk about growing up, having gone to a Catholic school with the nuns who lived, quote, on Green Street, and how they were no nonsense when it came to, discipline and instruction, that kind of thing. And the memories, the early memories that I have is going, I guess it was on Fridays, I'm vague on that, to once a week, going to Mass. And in the church that still stands there on the corner of Academy and Reed. And looks very different now than it did then. It was huge for some, then. But
Things always look bigger when you're a child.
Things always look bigger when you're a child. It's like, wow, so it was this thing.
Right.
So, yeah, but those early memories of St. Alphonsus, and then moving on to Sandbeck, right around the corner, and just that neighborhood. And people often talk about having and lived at a time when you didn't have to lock the doors and just romanticize about that. But the value of that time had to be, from my vantage point, is the investment that the people around me and my contemporaries made in our lives. It is true, and I know I have a lot of memories of this, that the adults in our community took ownership in our lives. They took ownership from the vantage point that when they had permission, and I'm sure you've heard this from folk in that era. I was born 1956, 57 years old. And so in that era, of a child, whenever they walked out of the house, they were the community's son or daughter. And particularly the guys, the boys. Those, not just the men, but the people in the community, obviously the grandmoms and the aunts and uncles, not literally, but they saw themselves as that. And so those were the foundational things, if I say that, about growing up in the early years.
So, yeah, we've heard that from a lot of people.
Sure.
Exactly what you said. Did you kind of have that, the church?
Sure.
Making sure everything was right. With
Making sure
students, too,
everything was
right?
right, yeah.
Exactly. You said you went from St. Alphonsus to Sam Vic. How old were you when you switched over to that school?
I think I was about, only went kindergarten.
Right, okay.
In first grade at Sam Vic. And so I get, around the 6 years old range or so. And for those first 7 years there, and all of my, most all of my teachers, my very first teacher when I was in the 7th grade, I never will forget it, was Miss Lee. And Miss Lee was the only white teacher in the school. And of course, we were right on the edge of the whole integration piece.
Right.
And so she was an older lady, but a very kind, I remember that, as a very kind grandmother kind of lady. And so, but it didn't particularly matter whether that she was or was not African American, and because just, I think, the way that I was raised, that you respect adults.
Right.
And teachers, whatever the teacher says was gospel. Bottom line, you dare not, be disrespectful regardless of who that teacher was, or whatever their ethnicity was.
So basically, I guess by the time you were in junior high school, integration had already occurred at that point. And where'd you end up going to high school at?
I'm not going to Fike.
Fike, okay.
And I went to Coon. I was among that first crowd. We did Coon and Woodard in the 8th grade. We would do half a year at Coon, half a year at Woodard. We'd walk down Keenan Street down to Woodard.
I've heard people mention that where they had to go one semester one to the other. Do you recall why they had to do that at all?
I don't have a clear understanding of that. I don't know if it was the giving us a chance to interact both places. I'm not really sure if it was the population that, obviously Woodard was just 8th grade. And, half in that maybe Coon couldn't accommodate the entire 8th grade class.
Right.
And so maybe that was a way of them doing that. And then of course we come back 9th grade. We would spend a whole year there at Coon. And then we did a leap and went to Barton for 1 year, 10th grade. And then the last 2 years at Fike, 11 and 12.
I've spoken to, matter of fact, it was a white man I spoke to before. He actually told me he went to Darton
and
then the 10th grade for one semester.
For one?
Yeah, which I thought was like, I couldn't believe that, So you ended up graduating from Fike, and where'd you go to after that?
After leaving Fike, I had ambitions, as perhaps most of my contemporaries and guys anyway, playing professional something. And for me, it was basketball. And so I wanted to go to Maryland State at that time. The name changed to University of Maryland Shore. And I was going to go as a walk-on and so forth. Well, the safe to say that didn't quite, come together as I planned.
Did you play basketball in high school?
Played basketball in high school, all through high school. And, rich memories and experiences. But, that just didn't quite happen that way. And so I thought about ROTC. Going to college, doing ROTC, graduating, and, with a second lieutenant, if memory serves me correctly. And so had gone to Seymour Johnson to do the whole, the physical and all so forth and so on. Well, went to Maryland, went to pre-college during the summer to get an experience, and that was by far, I grew up that summer. No question about it. Even today, I talk about that, having grown up that summer, because one of the things that inspired me not just to go to Maryland to play basketball, or hope to play basketball. All of my friends were going to schools in North Carolina, North Carolina A&T, and where Central, so forth and so on. I said I want to go someplace I don't know anybody, and Princess Anne, Maryland was a place that I ended up that summer. And when I say grew up, I really do mean that, because when I went to to college, to pre-college, interacted with students from all over. And I don't remember there being but just a few of us that were from the South. Most of the students were from the Philadelphia, New York, New Jersey area. And very, well, you know, city slickers and streetwise, that kind of thing. Unlike, you know, us in the South, whose life was a little bit slower.
Little country.
Little country, yeah, country. Very much country. And my roommate was a guy from New Jersey. And it turns out, when I say streetwise, he really was that. But within a week or so, he became known as the campus pusher among us, you know, because a bunch of freshmen. And oh my gosh. And all of the things that I had been taught about, you know, making decisions, just all of that stuff came rushing to the forefront. And I had to make some decisions about how I was going to, you know, conduct. You know, because, you know, I could hear my mother saying, I didn't raise you like that. You know, and I'm looking around, I'm hearing voices. I know she's not here. You know, but I was grateful. So for that kind of foundation that, you know, enabled me to make some real mature decisions, you know, without having to do a lot of pondering and considering, you know, because this is the stuff that they said, you know, you don't mess with that, you don't do that, and so forth and so on. So.
Well, I might ask you, what did you end up doing after college?
My intent was to go to law school. I had this, you know, interested in obtaining a JD PhD degree. Did not want to practice law, had no intentions and no desire for that, but I wanted to do research. And I would get a joint degree at Hackney University in Pennsylvania. I think it was in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, and then do criminology. You know, I was, you know, research the criminal mind. So that was, but while all these things were going on, there was a kind of simmering, if you will, a product of the church. I grew up in Wilson Chapel, Freeman Baptist Church, and Bishop C.C. Thomas was the pastor. My mother was an usher, and so the church was obviously a part of my life. And step by step by step, I ended up ultimately, if I fast forward, if you will, going to divinity school at Duke. And before that, you know, took us just one step back. Decided that when I came back to Wilson in '77, just a short period, you know, within those couple of years after graduation, I had gone to Concord, to Barber, Scotia, contemplating that. Well, criminal justice was still very much interested in criminal justice law enforcement field. So I ended up going to Wilson Community at the time, Wilson Tech, doing started out thinking something about criminal justice, but really data processing. Believe it or not, that was the major, if you will, the area of focus. Well, I quickly learned that the binary numbers, I could not, it just didn't add up, right? Those zeros and those ones, I was not, as he said, I wasn't really feeling that.
No computer codes for you.
I couldn't write, you know, so. But long story short, I ended up doing a law enforcement because I was backdoor my way into this. And so did a 2-year degree. And then went on to Shaw, transferred to Shaw in Rocky Mount. Well, during this period, my mother and father their health was failing. And so I had to be close, you know, relatively close to home. So I did a lot of things. I learned to paint, to do minor carpentry. You know, I was kind of like I did a whole bunch of stuff that stuff you didn't know you didn't know to do, but you kind of, in some ways, you learn on the fly. Well, didn't mess up too many people's homes. You know, they didn't trust me with too much. You know, but to the point, you know, it enabled me to, you know, to remain close. I worked at Donnelly's manufacturing for a while, just and a number of things. But to stay with this educational piece, then transferred to Shaw and in Rocky Mount, and I was determined to get this degree, get it quickly, keep moving, because I had plans, major plans. And so I went over to Rocky Mount. This is just starting this new program, $12, called the CAPE program, the Center for Alternative Programs in Education, and did that program. Got on a sort of for fast track, and then decided. And when I started that program in '85, January of '85, my mother had passed, and so in September of '84, and so I'm wrestling with what's next. And so I did the program in about a year and a half. And my sister was in Virginia, Fairfax, Virginia, and she said, "Well, look, come up and spend some time with me." Well, this was truly the incubation period, because I was really wrestling. I had taken the LSAT a couple of times, and I had gone this, and I had, but the steady walk toward ministry was continuing to take place. So I said I was up there until, the middle, the end of the beginning of '87, late '86, '87, and came back to Wilson. And it was during that time that I really started to really give it some real thought. And finally, that I went to my pastor, who was not Reverend Thomas at the time, because my mother had changed churches, and I was now at St. Rose on Douglas Street with Reverend Johnson, Mordecai Johnson, and told him about I was feeling this call to ministry. And he said, "Oh, son, and all the ministers would do, come, write me a letter and come back in 6 months or whatever. We'll put something out." So sure enough, that whole period, I'm wrestling, and so what got to that point, I made the sort of decision. I was like, okay, I'm tired of going through this, right? Something has got to give here, and I finally said, so what's the worst that can happen? It's kind of how I ended up, kind of making the decision in the sense of writing the letter and then moving forward. Well, did an initial sermon in January of '88, and another a mentor, if you will, Thomas Watkins, who was the minister at Jackson Chapel, and shared with him, and he said, he was on faculty at Shaw, and Shaw Elementary School. And he said, Shaw is a great school. He said, but if Duke is also a good school too. He said, if it's possible, you may want to take a look at that as well. And I knew of some of the professors. I had read their works, and one thing led to another, and I did some visiting, and sat in some classes, and I was absolutely convinced that that's where I was going to go. So I ended up at Duke.
And so, are you preaching now? Is that what
I have did the initial sermon in January of '88, and came back to after doing school in '92. Came back to Wilson, and I was not interested in doing pastoral ministry. I'll do something else, anything but that. And so I was at Wilson Community as a counselor recruiter in director student activities. And so I went through that process, and step by step, started to think, well, maybe there's something to this parish ministry thing. And so started to preach more and more at churches here in the community, and doors open. And the last thing that took place, Calvary Presbyterian at the time was vacant, and so I'd gotten white Presbyterian. I said, man, this is definitely not me, not my background. But I ended up, getting on the, I guess what might be called the list of ministers, supply ministers. For that particular time, because, and again I state one step back to my mother, because she was an usher, had gone to churches all over the community, I had developed, not consciously developed, a comfortability, a level of comfort, if you will. Be it Baptist, Methodist, Christian, it didn't matter. I just went whatever. And so, and ended up, again, on this Presbyterian circuit. So, as it turned out, during this period, I would preach a month here at Calvary, and there was a church in Kinston that needed a minister. And so I did that for about 6 months. And so finally, I said, well, maybe I need to look at Calvary. But then I also heard, well, it's not necessarily a good idea to pastor a church in the hometown that you live, in the community that you live. There's some history around that. And it's in the Bible, of course. Jesus says, you may want to rethink that. Right. And so, I mean, obviously not those words, but and so I didn't quite get it at first, but nothing seemed to come together. And so the folk in Kinston said, well, really, why don't you give us some consideration? And so, it's just 40 miles away, and it's still convenient. Well, as it turned out, I said, okay, sure. And it seemed, when the moment that I did, everything just, and it was like, here I am, I'm here. And so I've been at the church now going on 18 years. And initially I looked around and I said, I've got to be in the wrong place. Just a whole style of worship, just everything about it was just so different. But what I discovered, that was the place that I was called to be. And that was the place that would allow me to grow and to have experiences of others. So I'm in my 18th year.
Right, okay.
And, I, on occasion, have come back and, to speak at various places. And grateful but for whatever reason, I continue to, not for whatever reason, but I continue to serve the church name.
Right. So definitely as a child, the church had a big influence on your life then. Yeah.
Huge.
Yeah, we spoke to a lot of people, they definitely would say, when they were younger, it was the churches and the schools.
And the schools.
Especially during the days of segregation.
Oh, yeah.
Those were the two pillars
those
right
were the
there.
pillars.
Right.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
They shaped us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you definitely did you have both of those as a child, or was it really more the church?
Well, I would have to say both, because I grew up as an adopted only child. Mm-hmm. And so my mother and father created a climate for me to read and to, just kind of absorb myself. And in all of and not just that alone, but the people that they interacted with, and understanding the value of those who have gone before you and the struggle and what they sacrificed and how now you have an opportunity. And then seeing things. One of my earliest memories that kind of helped to shape me, and I tell people, I take sometimes folks, I said, well, at the bus station, there on Green Street, I said, there used to be a section for colors and a section for whites. And I said, right across the street, I said, the building is still there. And a couple weeks ago, actually, I sort of, some men were doing some work there, and sort of a younger, and I walked over and took a look, and I said, you may not know this, but I said, many years ago, this was a segregated cafe. And I described to them what it was like. I said on one side was the colored section, and they had was stools. On one side. And I said on the other side, there was the door where the white patrons would go in. And it simply said that on right there above the door. And I said there was a red divider or curtain, and you could look over and see the white patrons in the booths. But the African Americans, of course, we would go in that side, sit on the stools, and and because my aunt would take me there, and I remember it vividly. And I said, right there in front of the courthouse, I said, there's a monument to Confederate veterans. I said, on one side, I said, it's not there now. I said, it had said white, and the other side said color. And I said, they have now, if you go down there and look at it now, you can see where it has been removed. And I said, and I say all that, you asked in terms of the church. Well, the church, in understanding the struggle for civil rights and human rights, shaped me and shaped, my focus and my drive and the things that I have advocated for throughout my life. And again, understanding the value of those who have gone on, who were before me, and then my responsibility that I have to remind the generation that would come after, that comes after me, the present, that many have paid tremendous sacrifices, and that it has been by the grace of God and the fact of the church, and the church was the place, and I say this often, was a place where we understood that the strength, the spiritual strength, to fight the battle outside. Once you become inspired, then you go out and you fight. You stand up, righteous indignation, so forth and so on, which in a very real sense has not changed. We're witnessing much of that with this whole Moral Monday movement led by Dr. Barton, who also was a classmate who was leaving Duke when I came in '88. And so, that's how, and a long response to your question about was it just a church, but it was that kind of dynamic.
Right.
As a product of that. And I say to folks, I born in 56. I came of age around 16 years. I came 12 years old. Is passing. So I'm old enough, but not quite old enough. And I can remember the marches, Golden Franks, and I'm sure this name has come up before. SCLC. And I remember some of those marches down Nash Street, and during that turbulent period, and also of course Milton Fitch Sr. Being those men leading those efforts, and I could go on and on and on, talking about the different personalities that have to shape that.
Oh, I was going to say, please, if you'd like to elaborate.
Just a bit. I can remember that during that period. One of the things, and this is a part of what shaped me, when I was growing up, my mother would always say, she said, son, she said, I want you to know that there's no one is better than you are, and you are not better than anybody else. And this is one of the things that little black boys were taught. And my mother would say, she said, now son, she said, now whenever you talk to white folks, she said, I don't ever want you to scratch your head. She said, I want you to be looking down. She said, I want you to look up and look them in the eye. Well, I didn't understand what she was talking about. But what she was saying was that I want you to grow up feeling good about yourself.
Right.
Not that you're any better. She would always say that. Don't think you're any better than anybody else. But you, as I heard Dr. King would talk about his child, about Yolanda going to Funtown, that you're just as good as anybody else. And with a sense of pride. And if you grow up with a sense of pride, you understand something about the gifts that you've been given and the opportunities that you have, which will enable you to grow up with the right perspective, if you will. And so, as I said, persons like Milton Fitch Sr. And people like, of course, Reverend Watkins. That was later years. But then I understood. I watched, read some of his history and saw what shaped him, and those, and men like him in the church, just huge figures. The Cub Scouts and the Boy Scouts. Paul Stevens was my scout leader, and Christina Armstrong was my den mother, right there on Penn Street. She would take us, in her home, and sort of nurtured us along, and during that time, and I'm sure you've heard this more than one time, and certainly seen some of the pictures, that just on the east side of the tracks, crossing the tracks as your piece indicates, that everything that we needed was on the side of the tracks. By necessity.
Right.
And so you grow up with that sense of pride, if you will. Did not know that in the eyes of many, that was somehow, and I'll use the term, maybe inferior. And I use the term loosely, very loosely. But it met our needs. And we didn't know any difference. Someone said, well, we were poor, but we didn't know we were poor. Right. We were proud. And that sense of pride, just instructed and guided our lives. And with that, we knew we had to accomplish. We knew we had to, and the old adage that you got to be faster, you got to be sharper, you got to be quicker. Why? Because you live in a world that's not fair. That there is racism, there is prejudice, but don't ever let that be an excuse for not excelling. Never let that be a barrier. And as I read the works and writings and listened to many of King and others who talked about that, I understood that more and more and more, and valued more and more, the little hamlet and the people that touched and shaped.
I know you said you came of age around the time, about the time that King
Sure.
died or whatever. Do you remember like an earlier age when you were aware that, there were differences, especially you saw the white and colored signs?
Yeah, well, one of the things that made me aware, I grew up at a time when there was, my mother worked at at Imperial Tobacco Company. And one of the ladies that used to, there was a quote, a nanny, if you will, that did, at that time, it's domestic work, or quote, service work. It was often referred to, I'm sure you've heard that term. And she would take me, when she would have to go to the bank, First Union National, there on the corner, and I never will forget, she'd go to the bank. She would leave me, believe it or not, standing right there outside of the bank. I mean, you wouldn't think of doing that today. But for whatever reason, she believed that either that was, as a child, maybe I wouldn't behave, or just, you just stay right here and let me go in and take care of this. And it just always struck me as sort of being kind of strange and different. But then, and I'm just trying to grasp that in that era, for her, and she was an older, elderly lady at the time, if you will, and that, that was a safe place for you. Believe it or not, you wouldn't get in any trouble, wouldn't cause attention to yourself, if you will. And so, the idea of being protected against all those forces, that would likely, that some of youthful actions would very likely might get me in trouble. Crossing the tracks at certain times. Some places you just don't go. When the sun goes down, you know better. Because, that was just the reality of the times. Black folk knew where they were supposed to be. And if you ain't supposed to be over there, you don't live over there, you ain't got no business over there, that kind of thing. Grow up knowing that. But knowing there's something wrong with that, but you accepted that as the way things were. But at the same time, there were those who were working to change those things and open up doors and things like that.
Of course, I guess by the time you were junior high school, those changes were starting to
Sure.
develop within this area. At the same time, you didn't need to have everything so insulated
Sure.
anymore. And, we kind of see how this community it is now. A lot of
Yes.
these businesses used to be on that street, it's all gone.
All gone, yeah.
Especially if you go down here and all these houses are all gone now. You could kind of give us, kind of your reflection on the way this community has changed over the years.
Going back, remembering when at that time Attorney Butterfield filed a lawsuit against the city of Wilson. I lived on East Street. The street was not paved; it was a dirt street, and the kinds of efforts to bring equality, so forth and so on. Started to see and how those efforts were designed to open up and expand the community. Well, by that time, a lot of those businesses were long gone off of Nash Street, and the doors had swung open so that now we could go places. But, and you will hear this, and time and time again, that I'll respond this way, then I'll say something else. That, and many will say, and I agree, that desegregation had to happen because we could not have survived. Really would not have been able to soar. Let me say it that way. But integration was another thing altogether. That's where the struggle was for integration, so that all would be seen, quote, on the basis of some degree of equality. Well, as that took place, well, those businesses start to suffer. The community, the close, the tightness. People left. They could move now. And therefore, the fabric and the fiber of the community started to unravel. And many have said that, you know, we lost something with that. That we did not maintain a strong sense of family. Didn't understand being able, as the four college students, the Greensboro Four, to sit down at the table or at the lunch counter, if you will, and to be served. And what was after that? Now you can go anywhere. Well, really, what does that really mean? And as I mentioned to you about Miss Lee, the very first, you know, Caucasian teacher that I had, what does it mean now to go to school with with other white kids and have white teachers when we didn't have white teachers before? And how did they view black kids? And how were their contemporaries, their fellow black teachers viewed? So it was not one thing. It was a lot of things that took place almost gradually. I don't say simultaneously, but gradually. And then, you know, just watching. And someone has said, and rightly so, that we have to, and this becomes maybe, I don't know if it becomes an argument that's a sort of philosophical argument to some extent, but it's an argument. There's a place to ask the question, what went wrong? Did we take our eye off the ball? Not that it was anybody else's responsibility to keep their eye on the ball, but us. And so, and many would take that argument and say, had black folk not been better steward, refused to allow just anything to come in the community, well, you could make a lot of different arguments for that. And still talk about equality, you talk about hidden, quote, racism. You can talk about a lot of different ways. But it is clear that there were multiple factors that caused Wilson to look different and walk around and say, well, what happened to that house? Remember that neighborhood? Remember what happened? And we often, those of us who grew up, would go back and say, man, this does not look anything like, well, it's not one thing. It's multiple things that took place. What I would go back, and I would say, from my humble perspective, that a part of it was as we came of age, we no longer sense this thing of community. We no longer sense that, because then every child was everybody else's child, and you couldn't do things. You couldn't get away with things. But then, when that fabric sort of kind of dissipated, then all of a sudden it's, well, that's not my child, or that's not my this, or I'm not responsible for that. And am I my brother's keeper? We're always our brother's keeper, right? Always, and in a very real sense. And so, struggling to rebuild community. And so, again, I apologize for the very long responses, but that's in my humble assessment. That's what has led to these kind of pockets of deprivation and watching. And you've heard this, read it, I'm sure, about Green Street. And I was growing up, Green Street, those trees were so huge. And they were like a canopy, just like pretty much what Raleigh Road is, right there at the Recreation Park, all the way down to Wood Boulevard. It felt like that. It was that. And then to watch, because I grew up seeing the transition. You know, I walked to school down Green Street, down Vic to Viola to San Vic to read. So I walk through that, all of my contemporaries, so forth and so on, and watch almost, yearly, not literally, but over the course, let me better state, over the course of time, and to see what happened when those pillars, when they died, and no one took their place. And that perhaps, not perhaps, but was devastating. But they grew up in an era. They were formed and they were shaped by that time. And that time continued on until, we moved up in a different kind of way. And again, I just go back to that.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you see any people trying to pick up that mantle?
I do.
In this area now?
I do. I see people, many of my contemporaries, because we understand something. Because see, we have history on our side. Many that followed us don't know what it's like to have lived through that. And we say to that, and I'll answer your question this way, that we know what those signs were like. And what it does, there's a psychological castration that those signs do. And they're inherent. No one has to say anything. But you know that water fountain says white and that says color. And you know instinctively to go to the color. Godwin's barbecue at the time on it's no longer Godwin's now, it's something else now there on Tarboro Street. And also Parker's. Black folk can go in the back door, because that's where you were served. You've heard all that. Well, all of those things, for those of us who lived that, we know what that was like, what it felt like. And what that does to one, well, it can do several things. It can, as I said, in some ways, a sort of emotional, psychological castration, or it can be turned around and be a sense of empowerment at a point of maturity. And I say at a point of maturity in the context that we have a generation now who needs to know what community is about. And there are those who, not all in my generation, obviously not. There are those who are obviously older, and even some who will follow, who say maybe in the 25 to 30, 45 year range, who may sense that, they don't have the first-hand knowledge, but there's still a burning desire to help to try to bring some aspect of that in. We cannot go back to the days, obviously, that we can leave our doors open at night and we don't have to worry about anybody, not even suggesting that. But I said, well, okay, how can we recapture the values? Because values don't change. Particularly the circumstances may change. They may because it looks different. Now we can pull out this phone and we can pull up information all over the world. We can do FaceTime or whatever for people. So the point is, some things are at our disposal, but then there are other things that you cannot pull up and press a button in the instantaneous. Those values that I was taught, they don't come, at the press of a button. They come because somebody makes sacrifice. One of the things, and I've often said this, and I had to learn, my mother, and I specifically said my adopted and only child. Why? Because that was a privilege that I had come even more to value. I value my adopted parents, but I also value my biological parents, who I still have a relationship with. And I value my mother because, my biological mother, because she had 3 children, and of which she was, as a single mother, could not take care of us, but loved the 2 of us enough to give us away to someone who loved us and who would raise us. And so I tie all that back to that sense of people who sacrifice and labor. Well, my adopted mother, as I mentioned, Imperial Tobacco Company, and also James R. Miller, well, she also did domestic work. And as a little boy, if there was ever anything that used to upset me, that upset me. I could not understand. Mama, why you go and you clean up, houses for white folks? Why you got to do that? I don't like that. But I didn't understand that the value was not in the work, but it was in the person. The value and the richness was in her. It was in what she taught me. And as King would say in one of his sermons, I think it was a Joy Major Instinct, but if you're going to be a street sweeper, be the best sweep streets like Michelangelo painted pictures. And it goes on other illustrations. And so I had to come to understand that. And that and then with that kind of value, sense of value and personhood, well then we have to somehow help others, this generation, to see that. Again, a long response and multi-layered response to your question, but that's a part of what I see changing, shifting. Is it going to happen tonight? No. Is it going to happen tomorrow? No. But I believe that as then I understood that every generation has a responsibility, has a huge responsibility to leave, to pour out and leave it all on the court, on the table, on the field, if you will, so that those who will come will pick it up. Because as challenging as it was, I have people who would say, well, son, you ain't been through nothing. When you go back and people like Sally Howard, who adopted me as a godson, who said at the age of 6, I saw my first lynching. She said that does something to you, that you remember. We were looking for, I don't even remember the man's name. She said, and I remember somebody said that we haven't seen him. And a few of us children, we went down and we knew we had to be quiet. As she tells the story in the way only she could tell it. She said there, and one of us said, shh, you better be quiet because you don't want anybody. And we saw him hanging there. And she said, that'll leave something in you that will drive you. That for the rest of, and she said, for the rest of my life, I was determined to help educate our people, she would say, to ensure that with the opportunity that I had, that I would give back. So that, and so she saw that as her contribution to making life better, if you will, because black men would be hung for nothing, literally, so forth and so on. So all of those different dynamics.
And it's interesting too, as we mentioned at the beginning of the interview, it seemed like it was the church and the educators that seem to be, and to me it seems like those are the ones who are continuing to pick up the mantle today.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned the Reverend Barber.
Sure.
Still got the church.
Sure.
Trying to,
absolutely.
Exactly.
And again, one of the things that I often talk about is the Montgomery bus boycott and how we rallied around that. And I said, now you got to look at that and unpack that, dissect it for all that it's worth. Because you're talking about here, 1955, and that's who rode the buses. Domestics and people who did, for the, not a large percentage. And so here you have people who said, wait a minute, we're not going to do this anymore. There's got to be, to believe that, God, if you will, our faith, says that that's not what we're made for. And so for 381 days, they did not ride the bus and strategize. We'll walk, we'll carpool, we'll do whatever, we'll pull it together so that this bus company, and for the most part, for this nation, in a sense, to hear us. And I go back to that to remind us, remind our churches and congregations and people wherever, not just African American people, wherever, but what can happen when people say, with a sense of mission and focus and purpose to better something, and nonviolently, and how King and others inspired folk to not take up arms,
refuse to take the words of Jesus and the methods of Gandhi seriously and literally, and knowing that there's a tremendous price that you're going to have to pay now, but know that you are doing something not just for now, but for the generations that will follow.
Right.
In history, in biblical history, quote the Israelites, the children of Israel, and that whole saga of bondage, and what that African Americans, black folk would point to. Look how long it was before God sent Moses. Look how they labored, but look how faithful God proved to be. Right. And so it's not surprising that Barbara would reach back. It's not surprising that it would, once again, we're going back to the future, if you will, and reclaiming the power of faith, and the church, and a belief of that, yes we can in the sense of the president, but by the grace of God we can take what we have and use it and change it. And last week, well, I guess it's 2 Saturdays ago, as I stood there on Fairfield Street, one of my former professors, William Turner, he said, look, do you not see something here? He said, I was in Asheville. He pulled out his flip phone and he opened it up, and he said, you see all these faces? He said, you see these, and we ain't in Asheville. He said, and here William Barton, a black, Christian minister leading this, and NACP leading this effort. Do you not see? He said, God is doing something that is amazing in this hour. And so then again, we can see that, we can see, but what is happening all around us is an effort at, particularly as I say so oftentimes, North Carolina is now ground zero. The nation, the world, is looking at seeing how we're going to handle this. What are we going to do? And so forth and so on. And so, again, I apologize for my long, answers to your questions. But how the church is once again, re-establishing itself, as being a voice, not as the King would say and others would say, a social club, or just a place where people meet, if you will, or a place to come for an emotional catharsis, but a place that we come to be inspired, to take the gospel literally. Now, of course, there are people who said, oh, Jesus was no liberation theologian. He was not. You're reading that, or have a, quote, conservative or fundamentalist bent on it. And we could, discuss the differences, if you will. But the fact of the matter is, Jesus' effort got him in trouble, when he dared to brush up against, the powers that be. But look at the result of his efforts, to address the needs of the poor, the sick, the in prison, so forth and so on. That has not changed. Do you have anything you want to add, Mr. Lord?
I don't. It was all I could do to keep from saying amen. I didn't want to. And I'd love to visit your church sometime.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I will, seriously.
Yeah. So.